Concerns regarding competition and revenues were also raised, which all senior management has to do. So how can we address these challenges to increase the take-up of OER and promote real democratization of education? How can we reach teachers in far-flung and remote and marginalized communities? It is these communities that need most help to improve the quality of education. How can we make them partners in this movement? OER can help improve quality. Availability of OER can release faculty time for more research and improving their professional capabilities. Diversify provision from full services to services that the learner can choose, increasing flexibility. Because right now we only have a 4-year bachelor's degree. Is it possible to give different options to our learners if we really want democratization? Can we ask them to study free and then come only for the exams? Are those possibilities emerging? And we will see that they are. And finally, we can cut cost through the free use of materials and free textbooks. Now, let us now come to a major development emerging out of the use of free content or OER. This is the phenomenon of massive open online courses or MOOCs. Started in Canada at the University of Manitoba in 2008. This has spread like wildfire in the Ivy League institutions of the United States. And especially this year, you know, the press has given it a lot of coverage. So what is a MOOC? Let's remind ourselves. According to the evolving definition on Wikipedia, a MOOC is a type of online course aimed at large-scale participation. MOOCs are a recent development in the area of distance education and a progression of the kind of open education ideals suggested by OER. A recent Observatory of Borderless Higher Education report sums up that MOOCs are usually free of charge, designed for large numbers, over 100,000, designed to encourage peer-to-peer learning, and meant to award completion certificates rather than course credits or qualifications. Stanford University offered a free course in artificial intelligence last year, which registered 160,000 students from nearly all countries of the world, because it was free, of which 23,000 completed the course, which is a very small number. Similarly, MIT-X offered its first course on circuits and electronics in May this year, at which 155,000 students from 160 countries registered, of which 7,157 passed the course. Even though the pass percentage is well below 10% in both cases, the edX president, Professor Anant Agarwal, says, and I quote, "If you look at the numbers in absolute terms, it's as many students as might take the course in 40 years at MIT." Because, you know, face-to-face students, the numbers will not be so many. So it is actually offering us the opportunity to democratize education. Now you'll say, if it's free, what's the business model? What's in it for these people? If they're not charging fees, what's the business model? You can see that the 3 MOOC companies, now these have been set up as companies, the costs are being shifted from the student to the institution or to future employers by providing the database of student profiles to the future employers. They're charging them money, but they're not charging any money to the students who can join these courses free. They can get a certificate of completion. And what they are saying now is that in the new year, if you want a completion certificate after doing a MOOC, you might have to pay $80 or something. Or even sometimes they say that, you know, you can pay $80 for a Pearson test. And there are many, global testing centers where you can pay the money and get tested and take a certificate after completing a MOOC. So the question is, can MOOC democratize education? First, from the developing world perspective, MOOC is simply a platform. It is a platform to organize an event. When a course is offered on this platform, it is still an event where participation is free and open. The core interest for our institutions, ODL institutions, may be extensively test the viability and usefulness of select MOOC technologies for learner profile and data management and basic delivery and assessment techniques. Now, in many of our countries, if the student numbers exceed more than 10,000, our platforms cannot deal with that data. But MIT is going to put its MOOC platform up there as an open source, which will become very useful for us because we can adapt it to ourselves. The second takeaway from us is that MOOCs can become a viable option as connectivity increases and open platforms are adapted and deployed. In our countries, developing world institutions can modify the MOOC model, which is purely online, to offer more blended approaches, which we are very good at. And we are also very good at using the kind of available technologies. So I think the answer for us will be not going purely online, but using a range of approaches and technologies for learner support, and not simply to give a certificate of completion, but to actually lead people towards diplomas and degrees. And third, the result, because these are all research institutions, MIT, Stanford, and so on. The research results from these pioneers in MOOCs will provide excellent data for us to review our teaching, learning practices for better quality and outcomes. So, there are a lot of opportunities emerging for us to improve our own processes. Now, in our part of the world, the general trend is to address certain core needs. We haven't reached that stage of, lifelong learning and learning for the sake of learning. One, there is a tremendous demand for qualifications at all levels, secondary as well as post-secondary. OER are not simply seen as a value add to existing educational provision, but also as a route to earning credentials. The only way to reach the unreached constituencies in remote and distant locations is through the use of appropriate technologies rather than computers alone. And many governments, for example, India is introducing tablets in schools, low-cost tablets, Akash. Similarly, the minister in Malaysia has announced that by 2015, one tablet will be provided for every 10 children, and by 2020, each child will have a tablet in this educational system within Malaysia. So this is now becoming increasingly a trend. And in many developing countries such as India, China, and Vietnam, it is primarily the state which is supporting OER rather than philanthropic organizations, as is the case in the OECD or the rich world countries or the industrialized countries. So from the instances that I have mentioned, it is clear that the OER experiment so far has been largely confined to the development and use of materials. There have not been any major instances of OER entering the structured higher education systems in the developing countries and making an impact on access, quality, and costs. To make that happen, the higher education systems in those countries need to look at their structures and processes and reinvent themselves. And whether we resist that, the change is coming. And it's better that the change changes us rather than we change ourselves. It's better that we change ourselves. True democratization will depend on the ability of the stakeholders in the developing countries to harness the potential of OER. But for that, we need to move from commitment to action. Now, what do I mean by commitment? As you know, the Commonwealth of Learning, which is COL, and UNESCO have been working for several years now to promote the development and use of OER. The 2012 World OER Congress was organized in June this year in Paris, in which there were 400 delegates from 70 countries who participated. The recent joint initiative has been a project on fostering governmental awareness internationally, funded by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and led by our former president, Sir John Daniel, whom you have seen many times at the OUM, who's also an alumnus of OUM, since you've conferred an honorary doctorate on him. Now, the 2012 Paris OER Declaration marks the 10th anniversary of the term OER, which was first coined at a conference held in UNESCO in 2002. So this was a big event, and this resulted in a Paris Declaration, which makes 10 recommendations. Let me just refer to 3 that may be of interest to you. One is foster awareness of and use of OER, which means more advocacy is required. People are not still aware, especially the ones in remote schools don't know what is OER. We must tell and open up the opportunity for them. Encourage the development and adaptation of OER in a variety of languages and cultural contexts. So far, most of the OER initiatives are happening in English. There are trillions of pages on the websites in English. But IITE in Moscow has actually done a survey of the non-English speaking countries in that region. I think maybe Hungary is part of it, to look at how OER are being created and used in countries which are not speaking English. And especially in Africa, there is a great need that OER should be developed in indigenous languages, which is why I mentioned that Kiswahili, Arabic, and all were used for developing materials in the teacher training project. And third, and this is critical actually, encourage the open licensing of educational materials produced with public funds. This was something which came out as a clear consensus globally, that if you are using public money, and a lot of public institutions of higher education are highly subsidized by the government, if you are using the taxpayer money to develop materials, please make that material available free to the taxpayer. So it goes back. And in fact, that is the fundamental premise under any OER initiative. Now, this Paris Declaration is an important development as governments tend to take such internationally agreed documents led by multilateral organizations such as UNESCO and COL very seriously. And the Paris Declaration could have a major role in influencing policymakers, as it is doing, and there are governments coming forward to develop policies. In August this year, the Commonwealth Education Ministers met in Mauritius for their triennial conference. As you know, as our colleague from Mauritius knows, OER again feature prominently in the ministerial communique, which is again an influential document that is taken seriously by policymakers across the 54 Commonwealth member states. Ministers recommend that a common platform for OER materials be set up for ease of access, and the development and use of OER in providing quality teaching and learning for all be promoted. Now, my organization, the Commonwealth of Learning, has already been working on a platform with Commonwealth Connects, which is located in the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, to develop a directory of full open courses in higher education from the Commonwealth. COL will subsequently deliver directories for OER in teacher education and secondary schooling next. So who are these people? We've catalogued these full open courses in this directory. The UK Open University has offered its free courses. National Open University of Nigeria and the Indira Gandhi National Open University are the major players. You will see some Canadian institutions, etc. I'm sorry you can't read it, but there's too much data here, but you can, this is an OER, please take it later. My own organization has developed several resources, such as a basic guide to OER, which actually addresses all the frequently asked questions, which teachers ask, students ask, why should I give away my intellectual property? Professor Mansoor will say, what's going to happen? My competitors will take my materials and make more money. What's going to happen to my revenues? All those questions we have tried to answer and address in that basic guide. We also have guidelines for OER in higher education for different constituencies, which teachers, students, institutions, and so on, which again is worth looking at. We have also developed a policy template which can be used to develop OER policy at the national and institutional level. We have developed a resource called the business case for OER. Why should we do OER? Are we going to lose revenues or are we going to get them? And there's a PowerPoint with that. And open licensing is again something which is very confusing. So we have developed a resource on copyright and open licensing and a PowerPoint, which is an OER which you can use which is available on the CALL website entirely free. In addition, we are talking about, we've seen the communique and the Paris Declaration. These are commitments made at the global level. What about action on the ground? CALL has helped develop the Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth, which is a consortium of 32 small states which have come together to develop capacity in online course development. This is a university of, for, and by the small states of the Commonwealth. So it's truly a democratic institution. Several need-based courses on disaster management, tourism, entrepreneurship, fisheries have been completed and are available on CALL's website. Teachers who had never developed a single page of online material are now training other colleagues. In fact, the Open University of Malaysia had hosted a meeting of the virtual university to develop a transnational qualifications framework, for people from these small states to migrate from one institution to the other. And we are very grateful to Tan Sri and to Professor Mansoor for their generous support in making that happen. So what impacts are OER having on universities? Lots of universities, I can't even name them, but I'll only name one example. This is the real action which is happening. This is OERU, which is a consortium of 18 universities from around the globe, in Canada, in the US, in Europe perhaps, and you can see at Otago Polytechnic in New Zealand, University of Southern Queensland in Australia. This consortium is using OER to open up education to anyone, anywhere in the world. So how does this model work? The participating universities are putting a percentage, not entirely all their courses, but a percentage of their courses on their websites as OER, so students anywhere in the world can access them. Their first offering, they have started now last month, to offer a BA in General Studies. That's the first course which the OER University is offering. They will then recruit retired teachers and volunteers on the lines of Doctors Without Borders, who will provide free tutorial support to the students. So they're not leaving the students to their own devices like the MOOCs are doing, but they're actually providing learner support. Students will pay only if they wish to take exams towards a qualification. Now, this will cost students only 20 to 25% of what they would normally pay if they were doing a course. For example, in the University of Toronto, if you want to do an MBA, it'll cost you $65,000. But if you go to the London School of Business and Finance, which is offering a free OER course, a free MBA, they've put 80 hours of video online. The students anywhere in the world can look at those videos free, everything. But if they come to ask for a degree, then they pay 20 to 25% of the normal fees for assessment and for the qualification. So this actually has an opportunity of really making education more affordable and accessible, and therefore more democratic. Another way in which OER are democratizing education is through the use of textbooks. Now again, I'm talking about real actions. Textbooks are a costly proposition. A study in Brazil found that for 75% of students studying at the University of Sao Paulo, the cost of acquiring textbooks was higher than a family's monthly income. Can you believe that? In the US, textbooks cost 4 times the rates of inflation. And in Washington State, which is just below Vancouver, community colleges are developing OER textbooks. And what they say is that an engineering textbook can cost up to $100. But if you are downloading an OER textbook, it can cost as little as $4. And then the good thing about using OER textbooks is that you can keep updating them, because you're not stuck with last year's thing, because of costs, you'll have to keep that for at least 10 years. And the brother has to give it to the younger brother and the younger sister and go on. Now you can actually afford updated material. And you can see that South Africa is spending 1.5 billion rand for textbooks. And their Department of Basic Education has now decided to develop OER textbooks, which they will look from the web, they will develop them for their own context and offer them to their students without going to the publishers. So we can see OER can have a real role in democratizing higher educations. So what can governments do? What governments can do is develop an ICT in education policy, and many governments are doing that. We have done a survey of more than 100 countries. Propose a vision and strategy for not just developing OER, but also for using them at all levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And I said we have also developed a policy template so they can use it. South Africa has developed a policy on OER. Many countries in Latin America are developing policies in OER as part of the ICT in education policies, and recognize OER development at par with academic publications to reward faculty in promotions. Because faculty say, I'm only going to get promoted because only my research and peer-reviewed papers will be considered. But if OER development also becomes part of that mix, faculty may be more enthusiastic, because without teachers, this movement will not take off. So what incentives and other institutional mechanisms and processes need to be put in place to facilitate the growth and mainstreaming of OER in educational institutions? Some of the initiatives need to include developing an ICT policy within the institution, elaborating a policy on copyright, providing incentives for faculty members such as increments and recognition of OER towards promotions, and making the development of OER a job requirement at the time of recruitment. I mean, these are some options. It depends on what suits institutions. They can pick up. It's just a kind of, cafeteria approach. But OER can radically change the landscape of teaching learning in the 21st century and contribute to the creation of genuinely inclusive knowledge societies. It's not the rich alone who will have access to higher education, but the poor, if they have the right connectivity and the opportunities. So in conclusion, let me sum up by saying that yes, the OER movement can democratize education by involving all kinds of stakeholders to participate, collaborate, create, and share materials, encouraging consumers to become the producers of knowledge. And who does this include? Our students. They can also become producers of knowledge. So far, we have only kept them as consumers, but they have many valuable things to contribute. And so far, we are only operating in English, so whatever gets written in English gets harnessed as world knowledge. But OER can enable us to harness the wealth of tacit knowledge across the globe to address the great development challenges of our time. And with that, let me thank you very much for your kind attention.